On that point of that new generation in the workplace and how they're exhibiting traits of being a little bit more cowardly in terms of having those difficult conversations, you made a video about millennials in the workplace that did probably hundreds of millions of views.
Yeah.
I remember seeing it on Facebook maybe 5 years ago, and I think it had 50 million views on that one video, but across YouTube, it's got tens of millions of views on many, many different videos.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking now about that new generation that you've described, that younger generation, that Gen Z generation, that are emerging into the like post-COVID world. What is the workplace for them? How do I as a leader make sure that if I'm hiring Gen Z, and I've got a couple even in this room that work in my company, what have we got to know about them and do to make sure that they thrive, stay motivated, and achieve their goals?
This is my own bias. I don't like the conversation of strengths and weaknesses. It's the famous question, in an interview, what's your biggest weakness? Well, I'm a perfectionist, I don't like the conversations of strengths and weaknesses because strengths often have liability. I'm really confident. Okay, in the wrong context, you're arrogant, right? But weaknesses also have silver linings. So for me, I'm chronically disorganized. I'm terrible, right? Every system app works for like a week and then I'm back to being disorganized. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Now, for years, I used to beat myself up for it and say, it's a bad thing. It's a terrible weakness. But the reality is it's context. So I was as a young entrepreneur, I was at this networking event and I met this guy who was like really impressed with what I had to say with my pitch. And he's like, Simon, we have to do work together. Here's my business card. Call me. Let's do this. And I lost the business card basically as soon as he gave it to me. So anybody who was organized would be sending a text from the taxi or at least sending an email the next day. Not Yahoo over here. I lost the business card. There was no way for me to find out what this important piece of business would have led to because I lost the card. 2 weeks later, I found the business card at the bottom of a briefcase. So I emailed him and said, hey, remember we met 2 weeks ago? I'd love to reconnect and see if we can work together still. He wanted to work with me more because he thought I was busy. So strength or weakness? The answer is it depends. Now, in general, yes, it is a weakness, it's a liability, and it causes me great stress. But not always is the point. And so, yes, it's important for us to understand our characteristics that we exhibit, of which some of them in certain contexts are huge strengths, and some of the exact same characteristics in the wrong context are huge weaknesses, right? So we have to be very careful when we label people or generations as being strong or weak, because the answer is it depends. Okay, so that's the preface. So when we talk about this young generation, the Gen Z generation, they exhibit many of the same characteristics as the previous generation, but they're quite different in the sense that they're very activist, right? So, for example, in the 1950s and 60s, people hated their jobs back then too. They just went to work every day and just suffered in silence. By the time you get to the 80s and 90s, people hated their jobs, but then they'd at least start talking about it around the office saying, this job kind of sucks a little bit, And then by the time you get sort of the 2000s, people start speaking up to their bosses saying, I think we should make it better to work here, And now you're in this young generation and they're just like, standing up and quitting and I love it, right? And they organize, they're much more, the previous generation would hashtag tweet my discontent as I'm sitting in my Uber on my way to brunch, but this young generation gets out and organizes and comes together. Plus or minus, depends. Sometimes it's a huge strength, the fact that they have that kind of energy. But sometimes, as we've talked about as well, they also have the energy to quit instead of having an uncomfortable conversation. So strength or weakness, it depends. And so I think the way we have to approach all of these things is with empathy, which is instead of deciding if it's a strength or weakness, to try and understand where it comes from. Because I can say this generation is irresponsible and will quit before they ask for a raise, or I can say, why is it that they're quitting before they when they just need a raise? What happened between A and B in that thought, in those two actions? And I'm like, they just missed the skill set. We can totally figure that one out. That one's an easy fix. So I'm not labeling a whole person or a whole generation. I'm rather recognizing that there's gaps of skills, which we all have. So when you ask me about any of the generations, and they all have strengths and they all have liabilities. And depending on the time frame and the context, sometimes those strengths also become old-fashioned, no longer necessary. They can still cause frustration, they can still cause confusion. We're still looking through them through our own prisms of our own generation. I've definitely caught myself doing it. I do it. My goodness, we never did that when we were kids. When I was their age, I'm actually saying that now. But I think the trial, the test is the practice of empathy, which is another skill that we can teach that's missing.
How is this the COVID experiment on the workforce and the workplace? So how do business leaders or business owners need to adjust in order to make sure we don't lose people and become an uncompelling, unattractive place to work in this post-COVID era? And also on the point, you talked about earlier about the importance of we're social animals and we need that social connection and we're optimizing that out of our lives. It feels to me like this remote working thing has exacerbated the issue because we're, for young people, I think that the office is one of the few institutions we have left where we are in person. We no longer get dating. We do that on apps.
That's right.
Food, we don't go to restaurants anymore. We just order Uber Eats. And now work, they're telling us, is going to be done from Zoom. I'm like, what do we have left?
Yeah, lonely. We're
going to be lonely.
Yeah. And it's not a coincidence that we see rising rates of depression, anxiety, suicide, especially in younger generations. So, it's not causal, but there's definitely a correlation. It reminds me of when, and I'm old enough for this, some of your listeners are not, but I remember when the internet showed up and e-commerce started. And I remember some of the people who were really into the tech running around thinking, this is the death of bricks and mortars. There will never be stores again. And now Amazon opens stores and Rent the Runway opens stores. And turns out the extremes are not great places. It's not the death, it's live alongside. They become different animals. They become different reasons. We go to shops not to get the best deal. You go to websites to get the best deal. You go to shops because it's fun. You go to shops to try stuff on. You go to shops because it's an activity, because our hunter-gatherer instincts, we like foraging and looking for things. It's entertainment. We enjoy the service aspect, It's with our friends. Sometimes it's not about the shops at all. It's just a place, something to do with our friends. Plays a different role. And the smart retailers know that. And so when we talk about work, it's the same. It's the death of the corporate headquarters, it's the death of the office. I'm like, is it though? The reality is, this is gonna be somewhere in the middle. And I think one thing, with all the predictions about what the future of work looks like, I think one thing we can be absolutely sure of is there'll be more flexibility. Where it used to be, hey boss, can I take off next Friday? Can I work from home next Friday? I have to stay home for whatever, right? Becomes emailing in the morning saying I'm working from home today, and everybody's just fine with it. Introverts liking working from home, extroverts like working at the office. But at the same time, sometimes extroverts should stay home because they can get more work done, and sometimes introverts need to come to the office because they need to connect, and we want you to be a part of the culture. And so I don't think, making any predictions about what it will look like, I think is a little foolish at this time. We know it'll be some sort of amalgamation. We know it'll be more flexible, and probably every office will be slightly different, and it'll fit whatever their culture is. And I think the office environment will become one of the selling things, which is if somebody really hates this office environment, they'll find another company where they like the office environment. But I think what's really interesting about the Great Resignation, what's being talked about less in the Great Resignation, is sort of the reasons for it. Some people talk about the government checks that we've gotten, that runs out, so that's not the main reason for it. People talk about how people are quitting to follow their dreams. I've always wanted to be an actor or a writer. Great, and that is definitely a percentage, and I love that, but those numbers aren't big enough. What I think is more interesting is that the Great Resignation is an indictment on decades of substandard corporate culture and poor leadership, because it's a big deal that we're seeing people, especially at frontline level jobs, where leadership used to say of them, they should just be happy to have a job, right? That those people are quitting without new jobs necessarily is a big deal. And they're definitely not all just following their dreams. I think it is because in the past, when you ask those people, how's work? And they'd be like, it's fine. Is it good? No, it's fine. It's a job, it's fine. Well, why didn't you quit? Because the unknown was way scarier. then fine. And so they made do with fine, and leadership took advantage. A lot of corporate managers took advantage of the fact that they could get away with fine. We could do the minimum because they're not going to leave. They're lucky to have a job, and what, are they going to go out there in the great unknown? Fine is fine. And then COVID happened. And a lot of people were laid off. A lot of people lost their jobs. A lot of people were furloughed. Some people kept their jobs but just lived in fear. And we all kind of made it out okay. We ate, we had food, you know. Most people made it okay. Even if it was difficult, they made it through. And so all of a sudden, the great unknown, a lot less scary. And so when you're offering me fine, I choose unknown. That's a better option. In fact, not only do I choose unknown, I'm going to wait until you fix fine. And I don't think enough companies are recognizing that the Great Resignation is an indictment, that the Great Resignation is a wag of the finger, that you have been getting away with substandard culture and poor leadership for too long, and you better fix your stuff. And I think the companies that will have the huge advantages is not the companies that get the balance of in-person or online work right. I don't think that's what makes it. I think the companies that get the huge advantage moving forwards are the ones that teach leadership to their leaders, that teach these human skills that we've been talking about, that create a corporate environment and a corporate culture that I want to go to every day. And I actually form good, strong bonds with my new tribe, with the people I go to work with. And I'm willing to sacrifice and not get everything exactly how I want it, because I'd rather be here and serve these wonderful group of people. Those are the companies that will have the huge advantage of the next decades or two.